Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock and you are very welcome to our New Look Breakfast Show. A packed programme for you this morning. We're speaking to the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, about COVID and cladding. The World Health Organization will give us their latest assessment of Omicron. And the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK will be here in the studio to discuss tensions with Russia. It's Monday, the 10th of January. Game, set and match. The world #1 tennis star Novak Djokovic wins his appeal against a decision to refuse him a visa ahead of the Australian Open.
I'm live outside the Immigration Detention Hotel in Melbourne, where the player has spent the last 5 days, but will now be allowed to leave.
Tragedy beyond measure. At least 19 people, including 9 children, killed in a fire in a New York apartment block that started in a malfunctioning heater. Lines of attack, the report from inside Kazakhstan as Russian troops make their mark at the airport.
There has been a very heavy-handed crackdown after these protests. More than 6,000 protesters arrested and a number of people killed keeps climbing, and the shoot to kill order remains in place also.
I'm live in Kiev as Ukraine braces for the possibility of a further Russian invasion. Today, US and Russian officials meet in Geneva to discuss a crisis that's seen a large build-up of Russian troops on Ukraine's border.
And I'm live at Grenfell as a new government plan to target developers over dangerous cladding is revealed. But does that go far enough?
More than 60 years ago, Marilyn Monroe won a Golden Globe. Last night, there was no red carpet, no celebrities, and no host after a barrage of criticism. We'll ask, is it the end of the road for the ceremony? Also this morning on the New Look programme for you, hoping to head off on holiday and wondering what the current restrictions are. We'll have the latest advice at 9:30 this morning. Plus, we'll tell you how the common cold may help protect you from COVID. And after more than 1 million people signed a petition calling for Sir Tony Blair to have his knighthood removed, we'll speak to his former director of political operations, as well as a father whose son was killed in Iraq, to get their take. Hello, everybody. A very good morning to you. We start with the breaking news in the last half an hour. The world #1 tennis player, Novak Djokovic, has won his appeal against a decision to refuse him a visa to enter Australia. Djokovic had been held in an immigration detention centre after Australia border authorities did not approve his medical exemption for not having a vaccine. Let's talk about it in more detail. Nicole Johnston joining us from Melbourne. She's outside the hotel where Djokovic was being held. Hello to you. What happens now, Nicole?
Well, it's been an extraordinary day here in court. The real question, as you said, is what comes next. We know that the federal government has had its quashing. It's been quashed, the fact that they tried to cancel his visa, but it's not quite over yet. And that's because it can now go back to the federal government, the Immigration Minister and the Department of Home Affairs to decide whether or not they will reinstate his visa. They have given some signs and indications over the last couple of days that they will look into that they could personally intervene and decide not to give him a visa to enter the country. For now, though, the ruling has been in his favour. He'll be released from detention. He'll get his passport back, his personal effects, and it's good news on that front for the Novak Djokovic team. But I'm sure that they'll be looking at all of their legal options, waiting to find out what the next move will be from the federal government. Essentially, the court found that there was a failure in due process, that it wasn't fair. So from now, we wait to hear from the federal government.
OK, Nicole, thanks very much indeed for the update. Thank you. Joined now by the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, Michael Gove. Happy New Year to you, Mr Gove. Lots to talk to you about. Should we just start with that, should we? Would we allow Novak Djokovic to take part at Wimbledon if he wasn't vaccinated?
Sorry, Kay, you were asking about Novak Djokovic and Wimbledon. Well, again, there's as we've just heard, there's a complex process going on in Australia. We have to respect the integrity of that process. And Wimbledon is some months away. The thing I would say to anyone is that it is good to get vaccinated. It is good for you. It is good for others, good for society. But with the specific case of Mr. Djokovic, well, I'll leave it to the Australian authorities to decide that for the moment. And as I say, there are plenty of sporting highlights before we reach Wimbledon.
Bit of swerve on that backhand. Are we ready to live with COVID here in the UK?
I think we are getting readier to live with COVID, absolutely. I think that what's been striking is the success of the booster campaign. While there are, with Novak Djokovic, one or two high-profile figures who themselves haven't been vaccinated, the overwhelming good sense of the British people has meant that millions of us have been vaccinated, have had our booster, and as a result we've been playing our part in making sure that we relieve the pressure on the NHS and make sure that care is there for those who need it.
And we're ready to cut the isolation period from 7 to 5 days.
Sorry, Kay, I just missed that because I'm afraid that I think I heard your producer in my ear rather than you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I was just asking, as a result, are we saying that we are ready to cut the isolation period from 7 days to 5 days?
Well, we always keep these things under review. And the most important thing, I think, is to ensure that we are in a position to protect the NHS and to protect public services. So we, at the moment, are in a position where we've reduced the isolation period, as you know, from 10 to 7 days. We'll keep that under review, but it will be the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister who will make any announcement in due course, not me.
Does sound as though the Cabinet is open to it, though.
Well, we always keep things under review because we're always guided by the facts, by the science, and by changing circumstances. So I think it's striking to note that in the United Kingdom overall, particularly in England, we have one of the most open regimes, one of the, essentially, one of the most liberal approaches of any country in Europe. But we also need to balance that with a determination to ensure that we are not overwhelming the NHS. And your question gives me an opportunity just to say thank you to everyone who's been working on the NHS front line for nearly 2 years now to deal with this epidemic. Their hard work, their dedication, their sacrifices are amazing. And we're all in their debt.
Yep, we certainly are. You say we're guided by the science as far as being led by the government is concerned. One wonders how much notice we should be taking of the modelling. The latest modelling that we saw from the London School of Tropical Medicine, they were suggesting that worst case scenario, we would see something like 75,000 deaths from the Omicron variant by the end of April. The latest figures that we had from the 23rd of December, particularly for Omicron, were 14 deaths as opposed to 75,000. Isn't it time we stopped going with the worst case scenario?
Well, I think we need to look at a range of scenarios, and it's always the case that we look at different academic models. Models, by their very definition, are not predictions. They just run through what is likely to happen. And again, at different stages in this pandemic...
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr Gove, but likely to happen, 14 deaths as opposed to 75,000. Come on.
Sorry, Kate, once again, I'm afraid I heard your producer or one of the excellent technical team in Sky just speaking in my ear there, so I missed your question. I do apologise.
Not at all. I'm sorry about that. I was saying there's a big difference between 14 deaths and 75,000. Some people would say that potentially was scaremongering.
No, I don't think it's scaremongering at all, and no one is setting out to scaremonger. What we are always setting out to do is to ensure that we are in a position to model a range of scenarios and to be ready for those different outcomes. I think it would be a mistake not to model some scenarios where the NHS is under very severe pressure so that we can make sure that the resources are there. I think it would be irresponsible not to have a range of scenarios because we need to be in a position where we can cope with however the virus mutates, however the epidemic develops, and that's why it is right that we have these scenarios. But it's also the case, and you're right here as well, that we stress that these are models, they are not predictions.
How long will lateral flow tests be free?
As long as we need them.
And how long do you think that might be?
Again, one of the things about the pandemic is that it's been impossible to predict with certainty throughout, but it is the case that in this country lateral flow tests are free, and unlike in many other jurisdictions, they're a vital tool in making sure that we can curb the spread of the infection and also that people who need to isolate do so. But as you pointed out right at the very beginning of our conversation, we are moving to a situation, we're not there yet, but we are moving to a situation where it is possible to say that we can live with COVID and that the pressure on the NHS and on vital public services is abating. But it's absolutely vital to recognise that we are not there yet. And as the Health Secretary has reminded us, there will be some difficult weeks ahead, and that is why we all need to continue to test, continue, if we are positive, to isolate, and continue broadly to support the NHS as it goes through a challenging period, but one in which the frontline professionals are doing an amazing job.
So we are considering phasing out lateral flow tests, but not for the coming weeks as we continue to try to deal with the Omicron variant and indeed the Delta variant that is still around over the next few weeks. So not for the next few weeks, in other words, is that right?
Well, as the Prime Minister and others have said, we will do whatever it takes.
Talk to me about why you're here today, which is cladding. £4 billion to help those people that are basically stuck in homes that are unsafe or they can't sell them. Is it going to be a voluntary scheme for these developers to get involved?
Well, we want to say to developers and indeed to all those who have a role to play in recognising their responsibility that we want to work with them. But if it's the case that it's necessary to do so, then we will use legal means and ultimately, if necessary, the tax system in order to ensure that those who have deep pockets, those who are responsible for the upkeep of these buildings pay, rather than the leaseholders, the individuals who in the past were being asked to pay with money they didn't have for a problem that they did not cause.
So you're saying that there could be a developer's tax and you will bring in the full weight of the law to make sure that they cough up?
Yes, and I think it's important to look at this in a balanced way. There are some developers, some people in the property business who have been stepping up to the plate already, living up to their responsibilities, removing dangerous cladding, making sure that buildings are safe. I applaud that work, but there are others who still have more to do, and it's a straightforward question. Should it be those with the big bucks, the big profits, who have been responsible for the construction of these buildings and who are the ultimate owners of these buildings, or should it be individuals who have worked hard in order to get a mortgage and who are now being saddled with costs for faults that were not their responsibility? If you put the question like that, then I think there can only be one answer.
What about people in buildings that have got the challenges with problems other than cladding, insulation, wooden balconies, etc., etc.? The DCLG committee estimated sorting out fire defects could cost something like £15 billion. Are you going to be looking at that as well?
We are. I think the thing about the costs there is that we've just been talking about modelling and estimates and so on. I don't think the costs would be anything like that, but I do think it is necessary to make sure that that buildings are safe. I think it's also important to bear in mind, though, that the overwhelming majority of buildings which are not high-rise buildings are safe. And it's important that we get a proper sense of proportion, that we make sure, firstly, that we get rid of dangerous cladding, that we make those buildings which are currently unsafe totally safe, but at the same time, with other buildings that have been considered to be in scope of particular types of work, it's important that we also get a sense of proportion back. Because one of the problems that many people living in flats face is that at the moment there is a question mark hanging over the safety of their flats. That means they can't get a mortgage, or others who want to buy the flat can't get a mortgage, and they can't move on. And what we want to do is to tackle the real dangers and restore a sense of proportion.
And in addition to that, they're struggling to pay their energy bills. Should we be cutting VAT on energy bills?
Well, again, I think it's important that we look at a range of options here in order to help. And the government already provides additional support for those who are in particular difficulties. We have warm homes payments. There are other ways in which we support people. So I think it's important when we're thinking about how we help people that we look at ways in which we can target our support most effectively on those most in need.
Is that a yes or a no to cutting VAT on bills as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think we should always seek to cut taxes whenever we can, but also it's important when we are providing support for people that we also target it most on those who need it most.
And so cutting VAT on energy bills is something that you would support?
Well, in my view, the more we can cut taxes, the better. But at this point, I think that the prudent and the responsible thing to do is to recognise that we need to take a balanced approach. And a balanced approach means that when we can support, we provide support most to those in the most difficult circumstances.
So particularly on energy bills at the moment, given that some people could find themselves with a bill going up more than 600 quid?
Well, I think that's precisely why we should be concentrating our support most on those with the least income, the least wherewithal in order to be able to meet those and other bills. And that's what we do. We target support, whether it is through warm homes payments or through other interventions, on those who are most in need. And I think most people would recognise that if we do have ultimately, it's all taxpayers' money. If we do have taxpayers' money to be able to provide people with support, then it should be directed towards those who are in the toughest circumstances.
Talk to me about the parties that seem to keep going on at number 10 Downing Street. It looks as though there were more taking place on the 20th of May last year. Were you invited?
I can't remember what I was doing on the 20th of May last year. Kay.
You'd have remembered if you were at a party, though. How many parties
sadly,
at number 10 did you go to last year?
No. No, very, very few, Kay. And
you went to
I
some?
think two things that I would say. No. I think it's important to stress that all of these matters are being investigated by Sue Gray, a brilliant civil servant, someone who will investigate without fear or favour. Sue is a permanent secretary in the department where I'm a minister. I don't think it would be proper for me to say anything other than everyone knows that she is a person of great integrity, someone who will investigate this remorselessly and whose conclusions we should wait for. And until we get those conclusions, I shouldn't attempt to preempt it, and nor should anyone else.
OK, let me just ask you one final question before I let you go. More than 1 million people have now signed a petition, I should say, saying that they don't want Tony Blair to receive a knighthood. Why are they all wrong?
Well, I don't want to get into an argument with 1 million people now, Kay, but one of the things that I would say is that while Tony Blair is a Prime Minister whose record, as any Prime Minister who was in power for 10 years it has a record which divides, I think we should all recognise that he served this country, he continues to serve this country, and I don't think it's possible for anyone to be in a position like that without attracting controversy and without inviting opposition. But for myself, if I look back at Tony Blair's record, while there are aspects of it with which I can disagree, I think any fair-minded person would say that he was an outstanding statesman and reformer, and as a Prime Minister who put public service first, this recognition from Her Majesty is entirely appropriate.
Which particular aspects did you disagree with?
Well, we could be here for another hour or so if we ran through all of the things which Tony Blair did with which I disagreed, and those things which he did which I think were worthwhile. I think it's more important to accentuate the positive in anyone's record, and so I would say that the establishment of academy schools and more choice in education was a good thing. I think it was also the case that the approach he took on being determined to crack down on crime and antisocial behaviour, even if it wasn't always delivered effectively, was right. And I also think that his recognition of the importance of a country like the United Kingdom being on the side of liberty internationally was also right.
OK. Sorry about the technical challenges. I do apologise for that. One way of getting around that, of course, is for you to come into the studio next time. So I look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you.
Not at all, Kay. It's always a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you soon. And can I say what a kind, thoughtful and gentle-voiced producer you have. I'm only sorry that he cut across our conversation.
Yes, you can. And I'll pass that on. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Looking at some of this morning's front pages for you now. Start with the Mail, pleading with the Prime Minister to save us from a cost of living crisis. The Mirror has an investigation into the Tory levelling up agenda. They report from a crumbling school in Yorkshire that can't afford repairs, it says. And on the front of the Times, NHS leaders say they're optimistic further COVID restrictions can be avoided as most hospitals are managing to get through the Omicron wave. Still to come on the programme for you this morning, with fuel bills set to rise. We'll speak to Labour's Jonathan Reynolds about their plans to help firms hit by the energy crisis. After more than 1 million people sign a petition calling for Sir Tony Blair to have his knighthood removed, we'll speak to his former director of political operations, as well as a father whose son was killed in Iraq, to get their take on the former Prime Minister. And victory for Novak Djokovic. We'll talk more about the Stars' win in Melbourne this morning with former tennis player Roger Taylor. Tragic news coming out of New York today. A faulty electric heater believed to be the source of a fire that killed at least 19 people at an apartment building in New York, including 9 children. It's the city's deadliest fire for 30 years. Our US correspondent Greg Milam reports.
Flames pour from an apartment in the Twin Parks complex. Pictures shared on the Citizen app revealing the first moments of what's become one of the deadliest residential fires in modern American history. In the 3 minutes it took fire crews to reach the building, they said the smoke had reached every floor. They found victims on each one, survivors, among them people who knew children who died, described the horror and the helplessness.
Tomorrow is a school day. They're going to ask me what they are friends. They're going to ask me tomorrow what they are friends. Because they go together, then come back together. What I'm going to tell them tomorrow.
The windows were blown out either by the heat of the fire or residents desperate for air smashing them.
It was a horrific scene because you have to realize, besides being a firefighter, you have to deal with the mental stress of seeing this carnage of what happened in the Bronx today.
Within hours, investigators had pinpointed the cause.
This fire began in an apartment that spans 2 floors on the 2nd and 3rd floor of the building. It started in a malfunctioning electric space heater.
And because doors to that apartment and a stairwell had been left open, the fire spread quickly. With no external fire escape, the only way out was those stairwells filled with smoke.
We are indeed a city in shock. It's impossible to go into that room where scores of family who are in such grief, who are in pain, to see it in a mother's eyes as I held her, who lost her entire family.
It all happened days after 12 people, including 8 children, were killed in a fire in a house in Philadelphia. It's thought smoke detectors there weren't working. At the Twin Parks, one resident said he'd ignored the smoke alarm at first because there have been so many false alarms recently. He soon realised, like so many, that this one was horribly real. Greg Milam, Sky News.
Myanmar's deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi is to serve 4 more years in prison after being found guilty of illegally importing and possessing walkie-talkies and violating coronavirus restrictions. Let's get more on that, should we, and speak to our Southeast Asia correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, standing by in Bangkok. Hello to you, Siobhan. Tell us more.
Morning, Kay. Well, as you say, another 4 years in prison for Aung San Suu Kyi, this time for illegally importing and possessing walkie-talkies and breaking COVID-19 rules. And of course, this is on top of the 2-year prison sentence that she was handed in December. That was initially a 4-year sentence before it was cut in half by the junta leader. But often we have this focus on Aung San Suu Kyi, but it's an important moment to really reflect and remind people about the wider situation, the problems facing people living in Myanmar. We have seen widespread violence since the military took power in a coup in February. We've seen shelling of civilians, many civilians running from their homes either to avoid shelling or to avoid intense fighting, which has broken out between junta forces and guerrilla forces. Also, more than 11,000 people detained by junta forces since the coup. More than 1,400 killed by junta forces. So today the focus on Aung San Suu Kyi, but the problems facing people in Myanmar as a whole continue.
OK, thank you. Looking at some of today's other headlines for you on the programme now, the American stand-up comedian Bob Saget has died at the age of just 65. He was best known for his TV roles as Danny Tanner in Full House and as the narrator in How I Met Your Mother. The circumstances of his death are still unclear, but it's not being treated as suspicious. Buckingham Palace has unveiled a programme of events to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Celebrations will include the Queen opening her private estates to the public, some of the world's biggest stars performing outside Buckingham Palace, and a 4-day bank holiday weekend in early June. Not clear, though, which event the Queen will attend. Now, take a look at this incredible bit of video from LA. Here we go. It may be the home of Hollywood, but this is a real-life amazing escape. Police saved a pilot who made an emergency landing on a railway track. There you go. They pulled him clear just before, wait for it, there, oof, train smashed into the light aircraft. My goodness me. Now, more than 160 people have been killed and almost 8,000 people have been detained in Kazakhstan following violent anti-government protests in the last week. Let's take a look at how the country got to this point. Since its independence in 1991, Kazakhstan's economy has grown rapidly due to vast reserves of oil, gas and uranium. The country also provides road and rail links between China and Western Europe. Protests began last Sunday in western Kazakhstan over a sharp rise in fuel prices and spread right across the country. Many are unhappy about widespread inequality and financial hardship. Security forces used tear gas and stun grenades to try to disperse crowds, but protesters took control of buildings like the mayor's office and the airport in Almaty, the country's largest city. Order has now been restored, with both Russian and Belarusian troops on the ground. A total of 164 people died, including a 4-year-old girl. Diana Magne reports.
The Russian troops keep on pouring in. There are Armenians, Belarusians, Tajiks and Kyrgyz too, but it is mostly Russians. Almaty airport is heavily guarded, their mandate to protect key infrastructure. It means we still can't fly in to where the most violent of last week's protests happened, where the shoot-to-kill order is definitely still active. But international flights are now open to the Kazakh capital, an 18-hour car ride further north. Nur-Sultan didn't see any of Almaty's upheaval. A protest early on and checkpoints now outside the city, but life goes on as normal, even if the whole country is now under a state of emergency.
This city has undergone a few name changes in its latest incarnation, as Nur-Sultan is in honour of Nursultan Nazarbayev, who is still technically what the Kazakhs call Yelbasa, leader of the nation. But the question is, for how much longer?
Nazarbayev was the longest of Central Asia's post-Soviet strongmen till he handed power to his hand-picked successor, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, in 2019. Rumours now are rife as to power struggles among the elites, that Tokayev was forced to call on Russia's help to fend off a power grab. Questions circulate. Who were these men who turned the protests so violent? Why were security services strangely absent when shops and the airport were ransacked? Was the people's protest hijacked by other forces? And why hasn't Nazarbayev shown himself? Zaresh Batalova is one of the very few opposition voices in Kazakhstani politics.
So do you think that the Nazarbayev era is over?
Yes, I think so. His time is over. It was supposed to have finished much earlier, but unfortunately it was a long process, and I think most of the problems in Kazakhstan are because of this.
Tokayev now has a chance to prove himself outside Nazarbayev's shadow, to see if he responds to his people's frustrations, or if he defaults to switching one autocracy for another. Diana Magne, Sky News, Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan.
Well, our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn is in Geneva for us this morning. But first to our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes, who is standing by in Kiev. Good morning to you both. We're going to talk Ukraine shortly. Not sure, I've got a bit of a problem with my lighting here, so we'll cut to you instead. Deborah, let's start with you. Should we talk to me about what we can expect over the next few days with Russia and Ukraine?
So this meeting that's taking place in Geneva is obviously all about security here in Europe, in Ukraine, but also wider security in Europe. British and American officials have raised the alarm about the possibility of a further Russian invasion of Ukraine. But here in this country, they want people to remember that Russia invaded Ukraine already. It annexed Crimea. It's backed a separatist insurgency in the east. And they have a big message to Western leaders not to make any compromises with Vladimir Putin that could further undermine their security. And with so much at stake, it's hardly surprising that a Ukrainian minister said to me last month that should there be another invasion of Ukraine, it could be the spark that ignites much wider conflict in Europe, potentially even World War III.
And Dominic, talks continuing in Geneva, of course, from today with both the US and the Russians. The Russians feeling very aggrieved. They feel that NATO is continuing to encroach on its territory.
Yeah, Ken, they're sounding quite ominous, really. Sergei Ryabkov, the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, and his American counterpart, Wendy Sherman, had dinner last night ahead of the talks beginning in earnest in the building behind me today. And Ryabkov was sounding a bit more optimistic after those talks. But earlier in the day, he said he was so unimpressed by what the Americans have been saying that he doesn't see these talks possibly lasting much more than today. They're due to go on to Wednesday and Thursday in different European capitals with NATO and the OSCE, of course. I think there is a huge gulf still between the Russians and the Americans. Vladimir Putin wants the immediate unconditional acceptance of his demands for security guarantees, particularly his demand that Ukraine can never join NATO. The Americans have said that's a non-starter. They are prepared to talk about other things like reducing alliance activity in Eastern European nations and missile deployment in Ukraine. And that, I think, is the focus the Americans want to see begin on these talks today. But there is that huge gulf between them. The fear, I think, is that the Russians will use these talks as an excuse. They'll find a pretext to invade Ukraine, and the gun that's being held to the head of the Ukrainians, as the US Secretary of State put it yesterday, is the fact that you have over 100,000 Russian troops camped on Russia's borders with Ukraine. So it's a question of using these talks today and on Wednesday and on Thursday for the Western diplomats to try and look the Russians in the eye and say, if that's what you are planning, you need to think again. The cost will be too severe if you do so.
OK, thank you both for now. And just to flag that we've got Ukraine's ambassador to the UK joining us live in the studio to discuss those talks in Geneva at 8:30. Western drama, The Power of the Dog and the remake of West Side Story were among the big winners at this year's Golden Globes. After a controversial year when organisers were criticised for their lack of diversity, the ceremony wasn't broadcast on TV and went ahead without a red carpet or a celebrity audience. And many of the winners have yet to acknowledge the awards. Despite this, the president of the awards told our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer she was hopeful for the future.
We're very optimistic. We're very proud of the changes over the last 9 months, and you know, we're hopeful for the future for the Golden Globes. And And, coming Monday, I think we're all really focusing on our ongoing reforms, because this is obviously not, a goal that we have achieved. It's a journey that we're on.
Well, the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, has told Sky News this morning that the country is moving to a situation where it's possible to live with COVID. But he added, we're not quite there yet. It comes after reports over the weekend suggested plans are being made to put an end to free lateral flow tests. I asked Mr Gove if that was the case.
We are moving to a situation, we're not there yet, but we are moving to a situation where it is possible to say that we can live with COVID and that the pressure on the NHS and on vital public services is abating. But it's absolutely vital to recognise that we are not there yet. And as the Health Secretary has reminded us, there will be some difficult weeks ahead, and that is why we all need to continue to test, continue, if we are positive, to isolate, and continue broadly to support the NHS as it goes through a challenging period.
Lots to get our teeth into with tomorrow's take at 9 o'clock. Tomorrow with us now. Good morning. What did you make of what you had to say?
Morning, Kay. Yes, we are leading to a point where the government are going to have to make some kind of announcement on how we live with COVID in the longer term. Michael Gove was keen to say that while there has been encouraging news so far on hospitalisations, we have to be careful because the peak has not been reached everywhere in the country. But he said we'll have lateral flow tests for as long as we need them, didn't put a timescale on it. And in many other countries, people pay for them, and the government. There was a story floated at the weekend that may happen here too. So that is one to watch. He didn't give his backing to cutting the self-isolation period to 5 days, though. Interestingly, after Nadeem Zahawi, his cabinet colleague, did do that. So that's clearly still being intensely discussed in government.
And a quick thought on cladding?
Yes, big package being announced today on cladding. The government have been very keen to do something about this issue affecting so many people. They want to raise £4 billion. Michael Gove said if the developers don't cough up the money, they do face a developer's tax. We'll get more details of that in Parliament this afternoon, but I think a lot of campaigners will be eagerly looking at the detail.
OK, more on that at 9 o'clock, of course. Tomorrow for now, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, talking about that, weren't we, with the Housing Secretary, who said that he does favour a developer's tax. Our correspondent Shingi Maruriki is in West London for us this morning, and that will be some solace, I'm guessing, Shingi, for the people of Grenville.
Morning, Kay. That's right. I think this new policy, which Michael Gove is calling a reset, means that leaseholders will no longer have to pay those low-interest loans which they would have had to pay to replace the flammable cladding that coated Grenfell Tower and hundreds of other buildings across the country. And Michael Gove, with pretty stern words, both on your programme and in the government statement, saying that he wants the property developers to sign up to the plan by the end of March. But some campaigners say that this doesn't go far enough because it applies to just cladding when there are plenty of other fire safety defects as well involved in some of these buildings, from fire compartmentation issues to fire doors and other issues like wooden balconies. And also the scheme doesn't apply to buildings which are under 11 metres. It applies to buildings which are 11 to 18 metres. So even if this is a step, I think that there are still plenty of questions to answer in this building crisis.
OK, for now, thanks very much, Xing. Thank you. New Year's honours list is often a source of controversy, and this year was no exception. More than 1 million people have already signed a petition calling for Sir Tony Blair to have his knighthood removed. Earlier, I also asked Michael Gove about that.
I think we should all recognise that he served this country, he continues to serve this country, and I don't think it's possible for anyone to be in a position like that without attracting controversy and without inviting opposition. But for myself, if I look back at Tony Blair's record, while there are aspects of it with which I can disagree, I think any fair-minded person would say that he was an outstanding statesman and reformer, and as a Prime Minister who put public service first, this recognition from Her Majesty is entirely appropriate.
Well, joined now by John McTernan, who worked as Sir Tony Blair's Director of Political Operations while he served as Prime Minister. It's good to talk to you this morning. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. So we've heard there why Tony Blair should get his knighthood. Whether he deserves it or not, given that he was the people's Prime Minister and so many of them are saying he doesn't deserve it, should he say, actually, I'm not going to take it?
I think Tony never claimed to be the people's Prime Minister. He actually said that Diana was the people's princess.
I was
Tony's
extending
always,
that to make the point, of course.
I know. Tony's always said it was the greatest of privileges to be the Prime Minister of the UK for two reasons. One, we're the greatest country in the world, and I totally agree with that. I'm sure Michael Gove would. And secondly, everybody is free to have and express their opinions about him, what he did as a Prime Minister, how he acted, and he celebrates the fact that there's criticism of him. He doesn't welcome people disagreeing with him, but he knows that's part of democracy. So that 1 million people disagree with him is no surprise. 9-10 million people always voted against him in general elections, even when he won landslides. That's the nature of our country. There's more than 1 million people who disagree with almost every Prime Minister we've ever had. So I think you have to go back to the core case, as Michael Gove did. And, you know, if you settle, as Tony did, a dispute in Northern Ireland, which hadn't simply lasted since the Troubles restarted, hadn't simply started, been going since the 1920s when partition happened, been going for 700 or 800 centuries. There was a dispute about Ireland, and we have settled peace in Northern Ireland because of Tony Blair. Only he could have finished it. Many people were involved, but there is no doubt by everybody who was involved in that without Tony Blair, the peace deal wouldn't have happened. And imagine our country now with the Troubles still continuing. So for that one thing alone, I think the Queen was right to give him the Order of the Garter.
Of those more than 1 million people, some of them feel so strongly that they want to return the Elizabeth Crosses that have been awarded to their children posthumously, and wives and husbands of those that were killed in Iraq. So the blood of their kids and their families, they're saying, we don't want these awards because he's going to get this. And as a result, one has to think, really? Really, is that totally appropriate that he should be getting his knighthood when people feel so strongly about what happened?
Many, many people have suffered terrible losses in the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. I lost a close colleague and close friend who was a colleague in the Ministry of Defence and who was also a soldier. Those losses are deep, and those losses can never ever be recovered from in a sense. They become part of your life, your suffering and your grief, and the loss goes on. The reality about the Afghanistan war, where my friend died, is that war was a treaty obligation for the United Kingdom. Once an attack was launched on the United States, the 9/11 attack, the United States invoked the NATO treaty, and we had to go to remove the capacity for Al Qaeda to have a whole country from which it operated and could operate terrorism against the whole of Europe, the whole of the world, to any place they wanted to go to. And the Iraq War, which people do have very strong views about, and I respect them. Tony respects them. The Iraq War, in the end, only one man is responsible for the Iraq War, and that is Saddam Hussein, a fascist dictator who refused to acknowledge the power of an ultimatum of the United Nations, ignored it, wouldn't allow weapons inspectors in, and gave the whole world order, a choice. Do you allow a dictator just to go, well, I don't agree, I'm not going to let the United Nations weapons inspectors in, I'm just going to ignore the attempt to have peace monitored, to have treaties monitored. I'm going to ignore all that. Do you just go, fair enough, or walk away, or do you have to do something? We face the same choice now with Putin in Ukraine. And these are very, very difficult choices. We have our armed forces, and we respect the work that they do, and we respect the people who serve and those who lose and the families. We have our armed forces because we want to keep the peace. We have to prepare for war. And at times, because of individuals like Saddam Hussein, because of organizations like Al Qaeda, prime ministers make the most difficult choice they ever have to make. They have to make the choice whether to go to war or not.
OK, John McTernan, we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. We're joined now by Peter Burley, whose son Lance Corporal Sean Burley tragically died in Iraq in 2003. You had the opportunity, didn't you, to meet Tony Blair. You chose not to shake his hand. Why was that?
I said to him when I met him that he had blood on his hands. He had the blood of my son, he had the blood of the soldiers, and he had the blood of the Iraqi people. He wasn't. Some of the things that's just been said, the island agreement, yeah, that's fair enough. They settled the dispute in Ireland, but we are still getting old age pensioners being taken back to Ireland to the court. So it was a one-sided agreement.
I know that Sean tragically died, I think I'm right in saying in 2003. He was in a vehicle which basically wasn't fit for purpose, was the argument, a Land Rover crash. It was blamed on poor equipment. I'm sure that you treasure all of the medals that you have received, and of course the medals he received while he was alive. Are you also contemplating returning his Elizabeth Cross?
No, I'm not, because that was something separate to what we're doing now. That was in memory of Sean, and I will be keeping that.
Good. I'm pleased to hear that. Tell me what justice, though, you would like to see for Sean. What would you see as what happened to him, and in any way trying to justify that? It's not the natural order of things for your child to die before you, and even 20 years on, it's, I'm sure, impossibly difficult to talk about it. But is there anything that can be done?
There's absolutely nothing that can be done. As far as I'm concerned, Tony Blair is an unconvicted war criminal. The things that they've been taught, the gentleman before talked about, went to the United Nations. Kofi Annan said that the invasion would be illegal without another ruling. So the war was illegal. But unfortunately, from my point of view, unfortunately, Tony Blair is protected from prosecution by Parliament. They're not allowed for things that have gone on. Decisions that he took, while he was Prime Minister. So he can't be prosecuted for that. But that doesn't mean that he's not guilty of what we're doing. So ideally, it would be, for me, Tony Blair not only did he brought the country to disrepute, and he still does occasionally. He still says the Great Britain is a joke, and all the million signatures on the petition aren't just in it's around the whole country. When they talk about having to get rid of Al Qaeda, yeah, they got rid of Al Qaeda, but they vacuumed that they left stuck in ISIS. Okay. So the terrorism around the world caused by ISIS partly is Tony Blair's responsibility, because he misled Parliament. The first thing that I would have been charged with misconduct in public office, because he did mislead Parliament. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, unfortunately, we were out of time. I'm obviously listening to every word that you say, and I would like to talk to you in more detail going forward. So we will chat to you again, but thanks for taking the time to join us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Talking there about whether Tony Blair deserves his knighthood, the arguments for and against. You've probably got a view on that, haven't you? You can tweet me directly if you would like to, at Burley. Meantime, the World Health Organization has said that the Omicron variant of coronavirus that's causing the current wave of infections may be less severe than Delta, but warned it's not mild. Joined now by the World Health Organization's Special Envoy for COVID-19, regular contributor to the programme, of course, Dr. Nabarro. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Are we finally on top of this?
Well, I'm afraid we are moving through the marathon, but there's no actual way to say that we're at the end. We can see the end in sight, but we're not there. And there's going to be some bumps before we get there. And I can't tell you how bad they're going to be, but I can at least tell you what I'm expecting.
Do we need more? Well, tell me what you are expecting.
First of all, this virus is continuing to evolve. We have Omicron, but we'll get more variants. Secondly, it really is affecting the whole world. And whilst health services in Western Europe are just about coping, in many other parts of the world, they are completely overwhelmed. And thirdly, it's really clear that there's no scope for major restrictions in any country, particularly poor countries. People have just got to keep working. And so there are some very tough choices for politicians right now. It's going to be, very, as I say, difficult for the next 3 months at least.
How are you feeling about us giving donations of AstraZeneca vaccines to those third world countries? Looking at the figures, it drops very quickly, doesn't it, after 20 weeks to less than half efficacy, and even more steeply for the over 65s.
Yeah, there are lots of questions, Kay, still about what does determine vaccine efficacy. If I want to know whether a vaccine is working, the most important thing I need to find out is whether it stops people from getting severely ill and dying. Measuring levels of antibodies in the blood is what we call a proxy. It gives us a rough estimate of what's going on, but it's not the whole story. And I think AstraZeneca vaccine shows that it's got a lot of utility in helping to prevent people from having severe disease, and it should be used, and it should also be made available more widely. There's one great advantage to that vaccine, which is that it can be kept at really a normal fridge temperature. So everybody should be really proud of the fact that this vaccine not only is useful and should be encouraging continued sharing of it.
OK, there's a university professor here in the United Kingdom referred to as a member of Independent Sage, Professor Christina Pagel, saying that we're doomed to massive surges 2 or 3 times a year. Do you concur with that?
I heard about that one. By the way, I do follow her social media very carefully. I do find the assessments helpful. And it's right, you know, the way this virus is behaving, and has behaved really since we first met it, is that it builds up and then surges quite dramatically, and then it calms down again, and then it surges again about every 3 or 4 months. Now, it's difficult to use past behavior to predict the future, and I don't like doing that too much, but I would agree that the pattern I think that is going to happen with this virus is continued surges, and living with COVID means being able to prepare for these surges and to react to them really quickly when they occur. Life can go on, we can get the economy going again in many countries, but we just have to be really respectful of the virus, and that means having really good plans in place for dealing with the surges.
OK, well, I hope that that means that you'll be able to see much more of your grandchildren in the year ahead. It's good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I've had some emotional therapy. Thank you. I want to keep it going.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's good to talk to you, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, here's a good one. You've probably heard of why the chicken crossed the road, but how about a different kind of flightless bird? Here we are. Yep, Chinese city of Zhongji. 80 ostriches decided to make a break for it when the gate to the farm they were being held in was left open. Naughty farmer, someone's in trouble. The owner managed to capture all of them. No small feat when you consider they do a top speed of 70 miles an hour. They're now back safely in their pen, and there are no injuries to report. So no harm, no foul. Ha ha. Quick look at the weather for you.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Week ahead starting off cloudy with some rain, but the weather will settle down as high pressure builds, bringing overnight frost and fog. It's been freezing, hasn't it, all weekend? Most places will have a grey and damp start this morning, with fog patches in the east and outbreaks of rain in the west. It's going to be windy over northern Scotland with some hill snow.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Just want to bring you some of the softer stories making headlines in the papers this morning before I let you go. That is amazing. You don't see that every day in the animal kingdom. The lion, or she's a lioness in fact, forced to turn back and run away after being turned on by a buffalo in Africa. Lone buffaloes, males, always grumpy. They're called Duggar boys. And if the lioness is on her own, she's got absolutely no chance against him. Captured by wildlife photographers in Kenya. The buffalo was protecting its young. So there you go. And don't come back either. Slightly close to home in the Mirror, where these beautiful shots of the Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights, were taken on Findhorn Beach in Moray in the Scottish Highlands. How amazing is that? Have you ever seen the Northern Lights? If you have, actually, send me some pictures, if you wouldn't mind, please, on Twitter, @KBurley, and we will use them during the programme. How amazing is that? The phenomenon is only visible in the UK during the darkest nights of winter. And from one natural phenomenon to another in the Telegraph, this, I don't know how to pronounce this, it's an ichthyosaur skeleton. It's been unveiled by paleontologists in the Midlands. I know how to say that because of Ross, of course, in Friends. The dinosaur was one of the giants of the deep when it roamed Earth's seas 180 million years ago. Scientists have called it one of the greatest finds in British history. It looks like a very big crocodile, doesn't it? There you go. It's hundreds of millions of years old. And just up there, that's how it probably would have looked when it was alive. Coming up in just a few moments' time, the very latest from what the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, told us just a short time ago. He says we're going to have to learn with COVID, and we're moving in that direction. He said we're not there yet. He didn't tell us how long we will be having free lateral flow tests for. And also talked about a tax for developers. All that to come in just a moment.